Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Cardboard Time. I am your host, Arwen, and I am flying solo today until the second part, where I'm going to have a special guest, but Justin is not here today, and hopefully this guest that we have on the next segment winds up sticking around for a little bit. I think you're going to be very interested to hear what he has to say and some of the counterpoints that he has to make to some of my comments. Today's beer of the day is the Double Chocolate Cherry Oatmeal Imperial Stout from Hop and Frog Brewery, a brewery that is very close to me. I happen to like frogs a lot, and I really like the brewery's selections. They do tend to be a bit on the potent side, and I'll say the same for this. I think it's very high-powered, very potent beer. Very tasty, though. You can definitely taste the chocolate and the cherry. There's quite a bit of alcohol in this, so this will probably be my only beer today. It's very good. Very, very tasty. For what's in store today, we are going to be talking about what I've been playing lately. It will be a shorter segment than usual, just because I'm going to be talking about a couple of solo games that I got to the table, and then we'll get into our Kickstarter corner. And after that, we're going to have some tips for those of you who are looking to back some projects on Kickstarter, what you should look for, what you should avoid, and good tips in general to follow. Without further ado, I want to talk about a little solo game that I picked up called Warp's Edge. It is a one-player-only game. It plays in about 30 to 45 minutes, designed by Scott Elms and published by Renegade Games. It's a solo bag builder that sees players trying to destroy waves of smaller ships in order to defeat the larger mothership. I really, really like this game, and it's such a fantastic solo experience. The component quality is excellent. The included tray is very well designed. Everything is very clearly labeled. The design is extremely well done. The game itself was very easy to pick up after a couple of rounds. I found myself busy putting chips on different ships. It just flowed very well, and I really, really enjoyed the gameplay. There is a huge variety of ships and enemies that you have to adapt to, which adds replay. So not only do you have the variety in the attacking ships that come after you in the different waves, but also the boss ships are designed completely differently in how you have to attack them, the different strategies that you have to adopt to take them down. I foresee myself playing this a lot. Not only do you have the boss ships that are highly varied, but you also have your own ship, which has a completely different feel from ship to ship in what you can do, what chips are included, what special abilities that you have to choose from in the market, and the abilities that you have every single round. Also, one of the things that happens during the game is different combos trigger. You defeat an enemy that gives you a chip, which you're able to then potentially use in the upcoming round to defeat another ship. You build a little engine, and being a bag builder, those kinds of interactions are important. Getting that right away and being able to use those abilities potentially right away, depending on how you time your attacks, is really, really satisfying. Finally, it is a fantastic little lunchtime game. And when I say that, I mean I can go and set this up down in my basement, and as I'm working from home, I can get a quick lunch and still have time for a game of Warp's Edge. This is going to be one of my games of the year. I love bag builders to begin with, and the fact that this is a solo-only bag builder just blows my mind. It's such a good design, and I'm so glad that I picked this one up. That is Warp's Edge. The second game that I want to talk about is Welcome to New Las Vegas. This is a game that I picked up because I liked the original. It is a 1 to 50 player game. It is designed by Alexis Allard and Benoit Turpin, and published by Deepwater Games. It is the flip and write sequel to Welcome to, where players are focused on building up Las Vegas hotels, casinos, golf courses, and more. So the original Welcome to I really enjoyed, and this is 100% the sequel to that game. It is the same mechanisms, just improved, more intricate, more involved. It's another layer on top of that system. I played this using the included Alexis solo mode. It gives you a variety of different opponents that you can play against, each one increasing in difficulty. The easy opponent was extremely easy, but they are very good for being able to get used to the game and still providing some challenge. This is definitely a more complex and involved game than the original Welcome to, but I really enjoyed the additional complexity of this game. It's just another layer on top of the original, taking away some of the bits that didn't fit into this theme and adding a plethora of wonderful mechanisms that wound up complementing the system so well. This really felt like the Welcome to experience that's the deluxe version, or the pro mode of Welcome to. There's a lot of aspects in this that I would not introduce to new players. And I think it's worth having both of the games. If you really do enjoy the original Welcome to, there's a place for it. I would absolutely 100% train somebody on the original first before moving to this, because there are so many concepts that overlap. Then you're adding onto them as well in this new version. And having that background is very important. There have been numerous push your luck aspects added to this game, and those are through the debt mechanisms and the limo trips. The debt mechanisms are very interesting because they vary based on what your opponent does without getting into too much detail. Your opponent is going to select something at the beginning of the game, which may or may not help your chances at the end of the game to pay that debt off. If you don't pay your debt off and you make too many choices that bring that up more and more and more, you may wind up paying a very steep 20-point penalty at the end of the game, and that is a lot. Also, the limo trips, you're taking a trip around the city, passing different landmarks. If you pass certain spaces, you'll get points for those. The problem is that you have to make a round trip. If you wind up in a situation where a player is going to end the game early and you haven't made your way back, you get penalized for every single space that you haven't completed that round trip. And those can add up huge, depending on what you do with your upgrades during the middle of the game. This one's staying on the shelf, and it'll stay on the shelf even if it's just for me to play with more difficult solo opponents. I think it's a great experience. It is a very worthy successor to the Welcome to name, and I'm really excited to get this one out to the table a little bit more. And that is Welcome to New Las Vegas. Well, after this, we will be joined by my friend Phil, and we will be talking about what we're backing on Kickstarter Corner. And welcome back. Up next here, we have Kickstarter Corner, and we have a guest here today who will hopefully be a regular on the show going forward, my friend Phil.
More or less regular. We'll see. I'm always irregular. It happens.
There is cereal
depends
for that.
It depends on my fiber intake. Yeah, we'll work on that.
There's actually a cereal that I saw that was specifically, I think it had a toilet bowl on the front of it.
Colon Blow?
Yeah, it was very similar to Colon Blow, but it wasn't marketed as Colon Blow. I think that was a missed opportunity. That was one of my favorite Saturday Night Live segments. So Phil and I met at a local convention called Con on the Cob, and we were both doing a function for Extra Life there, which is a charity. We got to talking, we got to discussing board games. I was relatively new in the area. We just had a great time all day manning the board gaming, what was it, a lending table, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was the board game library.
We found out that our gaming preferences especially with cooperative gaming and theming, tended to overlap quite a bit. Phil, do you have anything else interesting about yourself that you want to tell people?
There's always something interesting. Whether or not I want to tell is the tricky bit.
That is very
no, I love my board games. I've got lots of board games. Not as many as Arwen. I like to play games. It's just what I like to do. When I'm not working, I am trying to find people to play games with.
And we are both pretty avid Kickstarter backers. I think a lot of our conversations revolve around some of the things that we're backing, some of the things that we've gotten in, and some of the things that we're looking at to say, boy, I kind of like this. Do you want to get it? Do you want me to get it?
Oh, yeah. Surprisingly, though, we've had very little overlap. There are a few games, but the style and aesthetics that you might go for are very different than the stuff that I might go for. So we've actually done very well in that. I think only like 10 or 15 of the games that we've backed actually overlap in some way.
You're right. You tend to go for a certain aesthetic. Not that I don't enjoy it, because I do. I usually have a great time playing the stuff that you've backed, and then you're able to play some of the stuff that I've gone and backed. And I think you tend to enjoy that as well.
I do. And I think it's also the external circles that we associate with. So you have a group of people that you game with, myself included, that like one set of games. And then I have another group that's on my side of the world. Just my side of the world, as if we don't live miles away from each other.
Down the road from each other.
My side of the world where we don't like the heavier games. The group that I tend to game with that is not your group, that's not with you, tend to not like the heavier games. So the stuff that I look for tends to be very different. And I think it works out.
When we get into our topic later, that can be one of the things that we actually discuss. We are going to talk about some Kickstarter tips later, so we'll get into that in a little bit. So why don't we dive right into some of the things that we've been backing, things that have been on Kickstarter recently that we've actually gotten a chance to try. Some of the things that we've played have not actually been backs for us, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. The first game that I want to talk about is a game called Project L. The Kickstarter for that was for the Finesse expansion. It was recently up and ended, and this was, for me, it was a last minute backing. I had waffled a lot on it. I wasn't quite sure. Boy, I really, really like the aesthetic of this. It's very clean. It's very easy to understand. The tiles are very bright. It was just a very nice looking game. With 47 minutes left, I decided, so I'm going to pull the trigger. And there were a couple of things that for me resonated that I needed to back. I think the first thing is that I really, really enjoy engine builders. It's something that's been a very satisfying mechanism for me in the past. I think you would tend to agree with that, Phil, that we tend to like a lot of engine builders like Gizmos, to a lesser extent Wingspan. Things like that tend to be a good fit with our group.
I agree. That's also where the deck builders come in at, because they are the engines that you're building.
With Project L, instead of doing a deck building or pulling marbles like you would in Gizmos, this actually is an engine builder that uses polyominoes to build shapes out. And polyominoes have been something that have been very big with me lately. Things like Isle of Cats has really resonated with me. I enjoy that spatial relation. I think it's possibly because I'm an engineer that I really enjoy that type of game. Essentially, what you're doing is using a smaller polyomino and a bunch of them to fill out a larger shape. Once you fill that shape out, you get your used polyominoes back. You get a polyomino in return as well. So everything comes back, and you're building your pool of available polyominoes to make new shapes. And I'm wondering how many times I can say polyominoes in this podcast. And then you'll also get points scored for those completed tiles. As you get these cards filled out with these shapes, you're going to score points based on the complexity and the difficulty of filling out those shapes. There's up to 3 actions that you can take. Actions can range from getting a piece out of the pool that's an upgrade to your current piece, putting the polyominoes into the card, or drawing a new card for you to fill out. And there's also what they call a master action, which if you have multiple cards out, once per turn, you can actually put a piece in each and every one of those cards. So instead of taking an action to fill this out, an action to fill that out, and an action to fill this out, you're able to do one action to put a piece in each of them, which is really, to me, kind of the key to the game. Again, everything is very clean. Everything is very, very well done from the pictures that they have up on the Kickstarter. The mechanics are extremely easy to explain and understand. And we actually got to test out a version on Tabletop Simulator last night when we were doing some research. I found it to be a very quick game, just very easy to snowball and understand. What did you think of it, Phil? Because you played as well.
I did, and I'll tell you, if you enjoy the sensation of Tetris never giving you the right piece, then this game's for you. It was fun. It was interesting. I think the way I described it was Splendor meets Tetris, because you have a bit more control over the things that you're trying to build your engine out of than you do with Splendor, but you still have that same issue of randomness that you might run into with Splendor in the things that you might need not coming up on your turn. It would be interesting to play it with more than 2 people, but all in all, I thought it was a good game, and I'd definitely play it again.
It is off of Kickstarter right now, but I do believe that you might be able to do a late pledge as well if you're interested. The new expansion content will add new scoring opportunities. So there are tiles that come out that everybody can use. And if you fulfill certain conditions, for example, putting certain pieces in place, filling out different cards, you're able to score coins, which can then be turned in to do an additional action on your turn, or possibly help you out late in the game by filling out some of those cards at the end. The Kickstarter had the expansion alone, that was €15. The base game and the current expansion for €49. And then they had a complete everything that they've ever done that ran €64, which gave you another expansion for the ghost pieces that we didn't play with last night. Any final thoughts on Project L, Phil?
No, if you like clean, very modern looking games, if you like that sort of stuff, then that's the type of game you're getting into. If you like just very clean, almost like you're playing a game based on the Apple Store, just pristine aesthetics, then you'll like the look of this. It is easy. I think once you get how the game works, turns go pretty fast. So I would not expect a game to really drag on, even with some of the expansion stuff. This isn't the sort of game where you'd expect it to take a long time. So yeah, I think it's a decent game for the price.
And I do think it will be one of those games that you're able to get out to the table and play 3, 4, 5 times in a row if you want to while it's set up, because it's so quick, because it's so easy to understand. And it might be something that you have one learning game where everybody's trying to learn what to do, and then have a second game where people know exactly what they're doing. Now they're going to go in and be able to make some better choices. That is Project L Finesse. The next game that we're going to talk about is one that, Phil, you were on the fence about.
I was. I'm a big fan of the Sentinels of the Multiverse IP. So seeing a pandemic style game in that universe where you're the heroes trying to combat the villain who's attempting to overthrow Megalopolis just seemed like an interesting way to take Sentinels of the Multiverse, make another game out of it. I love the idea of it, and I'm a big Sentinels fan, as I've already said. Yeah, I was on the fence about backing it, but the price points were kind of steep, with $100 for the Kickstarter version and $200 for the the deluxe Kickstarter version, it had to be the right sort of game for me to be willing to drop that dime on it. Because if it's not the right sort of game, then it's just one of those things that I pick up and never really get around to playing.
And for everybody listening, I believe that was Freedom 5 that we are talking about.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. Freedom 5, cooperative, Sentinels of the Multiverse universe, like you said. It's a very interesting proposition. It was one of those games that we got on. Phil, you were on the fence. You were trying to figure out, do I back this? Do I not back this? Because the price point was so high. And I think we have a tendency to want to back the highest price point, usually within reason that we're going to get the content, not necessarily the super deluxe version of something, but I have all the content for this version.
Correct. And with that deluxe version, with that, you have to balance, am I getting the gameplay that I want or the components that I want for that price? And sadly, in my opinion, I felt this failed on both of those regards for either the $100 or the $200 mark. But what annoyed me, so this is a campaign thing and less about the game, but what annoyed me is they did have a retail edition that was $50. And the only difference, or only noticeable difference between the retail version and the $100 version, the Kickstarter version, were some Kickstarter exclusives and a game trays storage solution, which to me feels like it should just be part of the game. I get annoyed with Fantasy Flight games because they just have lousy storage.
The worst insert of all time.
Yeah. I bought a 3D printer because I was tired of Fantasy Flight Games' storage solution, but I'm not going to pay an extra $50 just so my game can be stored properly. Or at least I'm not going to do it again. You got me once with that, who is that? Fireball Island. I can't remember the developer, but they got me once with that. I'm not going to do it again.
Restoration Games,
yes.
Yeah,
they caught me once with that for Fireball Island. I'm not doing it again. So as for gameplay goes, or as far as gameplay goes, as I said, it's pandemic. So instead of diseases that you're trying to maintain, you are a group of superheroes that are trying to control henchmen, villains, and masterminds, and find out what the mastermind's great scheme is and thwart it. So instead of just having the diseases, you have henchmen that are scattered about the city that are various colors. And you move about the city, again, like pandemic, you deal with them. But and that's about where the similarities stop. Beyond that, then you have villains that you're dealing with. And those villains are, again, your superpowered stuff. So if you're familiar with Sentinels of the Multiverse, it can be someone like Fright Train, or it can be Ambuscade. So you have these villains that are also wreaking havoc, and they're bolstering the minions, and they're causing problems for the heroes, and they're leaving anarchy behind them. And that anarchy is an interesting aspect, and I'll get to that in a second. And then on top of those villains, you have the mastermind. And the demo game that's on Tabletop Simulator, the mastermind was Baron Blade. So he's got his defense base, and he's trying to pull the moon into the earth, kill everybody because somebody killed his parents when he was a kid. It's like the crazy Batman thing. So you've got these interesting things that you're trying to balance out and work against. And then the campaign aspect of the game is neat because it's a comic book. So you read the comic book and it tells you how to set up for that particular part of the story. And when a particular event is triggered, you flip to the next part and the villain starts powering up and things start to get worse. And then you move on to the next part. And now, time is almost upon us and we've got to win now. And so there were interesting aspects to that game. I mentioned earlier anarchy. So various cities, various points in the city might have an anarchy token on them. And that can be Baron Blade is hiring Blade battalions, or what's his name? Fright Train is creating a super powerful drug and selling it to people, or whatever it happens to be. And you just pick those kind of randomly. So there was a nice random aspect to it. There was an interesting co-op and combat mechanism. But when it was all said and done, it just felt like it was a lot more going on than pandemic, which can be good or bad. It depends on the people you're working with. And it just didn't feel like it was worth the money, or that it would hit the table as much as I would want to justify that cost for the game.
Those are both excellent points, and one that we're certainly going to get into in the next segment. I think for me, it played well. It was very complex. There's a lot of and a lot of people call this fiddliness. I know there's some people who take issue with the term, but it's a lot of small little things that you have to do in order to make sure that your game state is correct.
Yes.
Screwing one of those things up or messing one of those things up, and which will happen if you're new and you don't necessarily understand all the small mechanics of the game. When you screw one of those things up, that can have a big impact on the outcome of the game. So that's something that I saw, that there is quite a bit of a learning curve to that. The other thing that I saw was the fact that I have a lot of games. I have a lot of games, period, but I have a lot of games that individually they hit a lot of the notes that this hits in some way. So I have Pandemic that might hit this note, and I have Kick-Ass, the game that might take care of this note. And it's kind of an amalgamation of all those games with Sentinels of the Multiverse as a theme, which isn't necessarily bad. I enjoy the Sentinels property as you do. We've played a lot of it, but it's something that I felt this isn't necessarily different enough for me to pull the trigger on. And I think the other point that you had was, okay, so for this $49 price point, I can get in on the base level. For $99, now I have an organizer and some Kickstarter exclusives. So if you're going to go to the $49 price point, other than feeling an obligation to support the publisher directly, do you really need to go through Kickstarter to do that? Or can I just go to my local game store or Cool Stuff Inc. or Miniature Market or whatever retailer that you enjoy and just buy it from them later?
Yep.
And I think that's the point that I just said. Again, it wouldn't be something that I bought, and I think ultimately you came to the same decision.
I did. As while I enjoyed the game, if I'm looking for that sort of play, I will play Pandemic or Pandemic Cthulhu or Pandemic the Cure. There are options out there. Pandemic the Cure, and not to wander away from the Kickstarter stuff, but there are games out there that just hit that beat and give you that sort of co-op feel. I mean, heck, even Forbidden Desert, without needing to have quite the same amount of real estate and necessary just to play the game.
And not only real estate, but the understanding of the people that are playing this in your gaming group, of being able to comprehend a lot of the concepts that Freedom 5 is also requiring you to know.
Agreed.
So that was Freedom 5. And a game that I wanted to talk about that, Phil, you have not had the opportunity to play yet, hopefully very soon. I recently got Tidal Blades in the mail. And this was a game that I have been waiting for a very, very, very long time. It took about 2 years. It had various development and production delays, shipping delays. Things just kept happening that just delayed it. Finally, it showed up on my doorstep. I've understood Druid City's commitment to quality in the past. They've done games like Grim Forest, Grim Masquerade. They've just done a very good job with what they've put out. It's always very high quality. So when I opened the box, I was very pleased. The box is huge. The box was probably close to 3 feet in length. It was almost up to my doorbell with how long this thing was. But the components are gorgeous. It has a Game Trays component storage system actually in the box as part of the standard. I think it was actually the deluxe edition, but the deluxe edition wasn't much more than the just standard edition.
Yeah.
I think the standard edition actually had a smaller Game Trays in there. So I know that they've been big fans in the past of just including that storage solution as part of the base game. This is what you're getting. So I got the opportunity to play this solo. I had to kind of go through the rules, and the day after I got it, I got everything out to the table. There is a lot of real estate that this takes up on the table. There are so many different little island boards that you put out. You have your supplies, you have your your character tableau, and that has dials on it for your different stats. But again, everything is really gorgeous and really, really well manufactured. Through my playthrough of the solo game, I'm not going to get too much into the details of how it plays, but essentially you are novices in this arena and you are trying to lead the Tidal Blades, which are a faction of people that are going in and fighting off these monsters who are trying to invade. And you're going through these games that are almost training exercises to build yourself up to determine which one of you or your opponents is going to be lead Tidal Blade. Everything seems to fit pretty well thematically. If you complete this challenge, you'll increase a corresponding stat. Decision making was really good. It made you focus on multiple different areas, make some good decisions about balance. You couldn't just focus in one area and say, I'm going to dump all my resources into here, because the AI would ultimately wind up making you lose in 2 or 3 other locations that you needed to put some sort of focus into. So timing, the AI did a really good job of making that timing kind of make sense. The AI also, because this is a worker placement game, having that sense of interference and having that sense of, oh man, they took my spot, I really wanted to go here, now I have to come up with some alternate plan. The AI did a tremendous job at doing that. It interfered with me so much in the spots that I really wanted to go to. So there is a track in the game that's called a champions track, and the champions track tracks your progress in relationship to your opponent, and you're going to want to move up this track. Basically, the AI, if you are performing an action in the same area, you can actually move them down the track for your rivals, so you're making them lose points. There's also a judge in a location that if you perform certain actions in that area, you are going to gain points on that track as well and move up faster than you normally would. So where those two kind of intersected, when you had your AI opponent and the judge on that same general area where you had your worker placement spaces, that's where you wanted to go. You might have been all prepped to go to a specific area, maybe to get a die. But down here, your AI opponent and the judge are down on this other island, and you have one space that's open. And that's where you can make your huge gains on your champions track by moving the AI down, moving yourself forward. So that made you kind of rethink, well, can I make this leap over here and do this action so that I can get this big boost? Or do I really need to go over here and execute the action that I was originally planning? It just really seemed to make you think. It made you have those good discussions with yourself as to, okay, where exactly am I going to go and what's going to benefit me the most? So it was really satisfying. It's a very good solo experience. I know that the multiplayer, from what I've seen, does play quite a bit differently, from that kind of struggle. You're not as necessarily concerned about placement in an exact round. You're more focused on just doing the actions that are best for you. I would highly recommend it. I plan on playing solo again on a higher difficulty. This gave me a definite challenge. It wasn't necessarily easy, but it was great for learning the game and really got me used to taking those actions, what I had to do, how to upgrade my dice, and those kinds of things. The small nuances of the game, it really taught well, and it was a really satisfying experience. I'm looking forward to the multiplayer. I'm hoping that, I'm able to share that with you and Justin in the future. I think it was definitely a game that is just about anybody can really enjoy.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind checking it out at some point. Hopefully we can get it to either Tabletop Simulator or to an actual table sometime here in the near future.
So that was Tidal Blades. And last but not least, a game that we wound up playing last night. This was another Phil's on the Fence. Kickstarter game is Townsfolk Tussle. Do you want to kind of go over that, Phil?
Sure. I'll keep it simple. If you've ever played Cuphead or Super Dungeon Explorer, then you're kind of smashing those two things together here. So I'll give you their elevator pitch, because why not? Somebody has killed the local sheriff, and ruffians are now eyeballing your little village. And it's up to you and your friends, the townsfolk, to stop the ruffians from destroying your little slice of Eureka Springs. The game is played over four rounds. Well, would they be rounds? We'll call them 4 rounds. Four big blocks of the game where you fight 4 different ruffians, and the ruffians are getting stronger with every step that you go. It plays, I think it's 5 people, so it's got a decent count. It's solely co-op, and there is a solo option, but it's essentially you, one player running 3 different characters. But there are lots of co-op games where that is an option, and it worked out pretty well to help me learn how the game was supposed to work. Each of the characters are kind of drawn out of the world that was Betty Boop or Popeye the Sailor or even Cuphead. It's all very much from that 1950s, 60s era animation, and very surreal. It's all kind of fun, but it's a dark sort of surreal. Each fight takes place over various phases. The first phase is a town phase where the townsfolk kind of have their own little bit of infighting. It's not really competitive, but you don't get to share things among each other. So there is a sense of selfishness that's present here, because if you want to have the better equipment, you've got to kind of do for yourself, though it is cooperative. So if everybody's knocked out, everybody loses. So you want to kind of balance that. So you start with the town phase where you buy some stuff, you organize your equipment, you figure out how you want to go into the fight, and then you go into fight mode where you have a very large gridded board that you put terrain pieces down on, and those terrain pieces allow you to have a very flexible sort of game feel depending upon what boss you're fighting or ruffian. And then each piece of that terrain has a different ability associated with it, which was kind of fun. And again, kind of it seemed to really buy into that cartoon vibe. As I'd mentioned before, I think it did operate as though it was a video game. So as you're fighting the boss, he has little markers where he would go into a rage and a powering up like those video game characters do. And then whoever's turn it was just ends, the villain throws another attack, and then it goes on to the next player's turn. So that's the long and short about the game. And really the biggest thing that drew me to that game is the art style. I'm a huge fan of the way a game looks. Ultimately, I saw this game and knew I had to try it, at least try it before I spent, I might have bought it sight unseen just because of the way it looks. And the quality of the miniatures that you get for the price is phenomenal. But I fell in love with the look, and then the fact that it's co-op and should be fairly easy to play meant that it would go well with either of the groups that I play board games with. Co-op is always a big deal for my groups. So that drew it to my eye, and I just wanted to give it a try. And Arwen and I were talking last night, and we decided to give it a run. I think it still has 3 days left. By the time you're hearing this, it might be over. I don't know. But at least at the time of recording, I think it has 3 days left on its Kickstarter counter. After playing it, we were halfway through playing it, and I hit the button to buy it because I enjoyed the frenetic, chaotic feel of an actual brawl, because you only get so many actions, and so you are very, very much in a state of continual motion and action, and it was pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it myself, and I can't wait for you to get this one because I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into it. With timing issues, yesterday we had a lot to get to, so we weren't able to play a full game.
And it should be noted that the tabletop simulator version of the game only has 4 of the ruffians, where the Kickstarter itself is going to have, I believe, 9.
So that's going to provide a huge amount of variety for people, because not only does it matter the amount of ruffians that you have, you're going to get 4 every time, but depending on when they come out, they are going to feel a little bit different.
Yes.
So I think that's a very interesting way of providing a lot of replayability. I think that this game is going to be awesome once it hits the table. I love the variable player powers all the different characters have. I
Oh
mean, the
yeah.
thematic ties like Granny Melba's farsightedness, where her accuracy gets better the further from the target that she is. Small little touches like that really make a game, and you just kind of say, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's great. It just flows so well.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
I had a hard time not backing it myself, but I know that you are going to get it at some point. So I will make sure that we get together and play your copy and get a couple of rounds in for sure. Any last thoughts on that?
It's fun. It's got the wacky cartoon characters. If you're a fan of like creepy or Cuphead, or what is that, the spooky scary skeleton cartoon, or any of that vintage 1970s 1960s era cartoons, if you're a fan of that, this is definitely a game worth checking out. If you like strong co-op without it seemed to not have much in the way of quarterbacking capabilities, because you're all individual characters. There is a bit of my secret stuff that I have to do, and so that means that you've eliminated some of that quarterbacking. So if you like co-op but you don't want to run the risk of quarterbacking, this is a great game. While it looks like there's a lot of moving pieces, once you get into the game, the pieces slow down a lot. It really is just you get into the game. Setup, I would say, is probably the longest part, at maybe taking 5 to 7 minutes to set up for each ruffian. So it's not like you're looking at a large setup, but there's definitely time to move from defeating a ruffian to moving on to the next ruffian.
I didn't find it terribly obnoxious, though, and part of that could have been the fact that we were searching through the bag on Tabletop Simulator, but I think that it's set up well enough that it won't be a huge issue.
I agree.
So that is Townsfolk Tussle, definitely something that I am looking forward to.
Oh, same here.
Well, everybody, make sure that you stick around, because up next after the break, we have some Kickstarter buying tips for you, some ways that you might be able to save a little bit of money on your next purchases. And we are back. So, we are going to talk about some Kickstarter tips that we have for you. If you are brand new to the whole Kickstarter thing, Kickstarter is essentially a platform where you can go and support publishers. It's a way of giving the developer some upfront money to be able to publish something. Phil and I have done quite a bit of backing on Kickstarter, especially lately. I got my email that I am a official Kickstarter super backer, which I think we have
how many projects is that to get the super backer?
It's 25 in a year, which $10 or more. So I mean, some of those were low entry fees. Some of them were very high entry fees, especially the Steffenfeld City Collection, but that was also for 4 games. So that was the thing. I did get my super backer email, and that made me very nervous and hesitant, and at the same time, a little proud.
If it makes you feel better, I got my super backer email on the 8th of October.
Okay, so we're both super backers then.
We are.
Oh, fantastic. So from one fellow super backer to another, congratulations.
Yeah, my pocketbook hates me.
Yeah, well, me too, but you know.
Congratulations. We've spent money.
You have successfully spent money on a bunch of projects that may or may not ever come to you. But one of the things that we want to talk about today, speaking of things maybe not coming to you in the mail, is how to try to maybe avoid some of those projects that won't come to you in the mail, that maybe somebody's in the market to just kind of get your money and bolt, which is definitely a thing on Kickstarter that you have to watch out for. I'm going to go right into the first one. One of the things that you should definitely look at is the previous project successes and any backing issues that that publisher has had in the past. So you can go into Kickstarter, you can look at a project, and under the creator, you can actually see what they've produced in the past, what they've backed in the past. If you see nothing produced and nothing backed, it's not necessarily to say that it's a bad project, but it's something that you might want to be wary of. And I know that that's something that I tend to look at if I haven't heard of a publisher, if I haven't heard of, the designer that's putting something out. I tend to look at what have they done in the past. There are a couple of publishers out there that we will not call out by name that have kind of had some bad Kickstarter issues in the past. If you go to their previous projects and start reading through the comments section, you can see where backers will say, it's been 2 years, where the hell is my project? You can kind of use that to judge your own buying habits. And you can say, well, am I willing to take a risk on this or not? That brings up a really good topic for us to talk about with Kickstarter, because any project that you're going to back is a risk.
It is, but to your point, I would like to put out a caveat. Sometimes it's less common now, or more common. I guess it's hard for me to say that, but I think it's kind of less common now to have somebody that is truly new and unknown entering the game board arena, just because of the not pre-ordering that takes place on Kickstarter. But what I look for when I'm doing that is if they have no history, I ask, what's the entry-level price point? Because depending upon that entry-level price point, then maybe I'll be willing to spend $30 on a game from somebody that is unknown. I think I have one game, and I've got a number of games, but I have one called Pulp Detective, which was from some French studio, but it was like a $25 entry point. It got into other things that I look for in games, and I'll try not to get into that at the moment. But it was because of its price point and other things surrounding that game, I was willing to take that risk because I can afford to lose $25. I mean, not that I want to get caught up in a scam, but I can afford to lose $25. It's not the end of my world. You know what I mean? So that is also something to consider, is if it is somebody new, look at what they're bringing to the table. Do they have prototypes? Do they have designs? Do they have actual conversations? Have they demoed it at a con? Any con. I mean, it can be a local con, it can be Gen Con. I don't care. But do they have people in their videos or in the project kind of talking about it, where you can see what's taking place and not just have some schlocky, poorly done 3D video where a hand moves a white pawn that doesn't actually touch the board in any way.
Not that we've ever seen that.
Do you actually? Yeah, but I mean, if we have, but do they actually look like they have a product? That would be the other thing I would look for. Is their history is important, but I want to give other people a chance, and so I need to know: do you actually have a product? If all you're putting on Kickstarter is hopes and dreams, I'm sorry, I've got enough trouble with my hopes and dreams. I don't need to fund yours. If, however, what you have is an actual product, like prototype is fine. It can be lousy quality, but you have a product that you can put forth with some art concepts and whatnot, then I'll be more inclined to back it. And then there's the question of price point, because while I'll spend $400 for the all-in Sentinels of the Multiverse box, I'm not likely to spend that on somebody else's campaign when I have no knowledge of who you are or what you're actually bringing to the table.
I really agree with a lot of those points that you made, Phil. One thing that we have gotten into very recently is the try before you buy concept. We've been doing a lot of that on Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia, especially with the state of the world being what it is. It's hard for us to get something directly to the table. This also helps when you're looking at something to buy on Kickstarter or a crowdfunding site. Publishers are starting to become aware of when they publish something, people want to try it before they go and commit a large amount of money. There's been a lot of people that have had issues with people putting digital versions of already released board games on Tabletop Simulator. Kind of borderline as to, okay, what do we do from an intellectual property standpoint? But a lot of developers have gotten to the point where they say, this is a fantastic platform for me to say, here's what I got coming out, see if you like it. And I think it gives the consumer a little bit of a benefit to one of the things that I was able to do very recently was go for a demo in a Kickstarter that I've already backed. They're basically into fulfillment now. The games are on boats. They're shipping over, but it's going to be a little bit of a wait. So they said, hey, we've got this on Tabletop Simulator. Here's the first scenario and here's the first boss fight. Go ahead and play it. Here's something to kind of get you excited about it. I played it. I put a little blurb about it up on my Instagram, so that's giving them press as well for when it does release in retail. People are a little bit more aware that it is coming out. So I think there are definitely advantages to publishers putting their games up digitally in some form, maybe not the whole thing. And we saw that in Townsfolk Tussle as well, where you had a limited selection of different things that you could try, but you do get that feel for the game. You get some anticipation and hype and people going and saying, boy, I played this. I'm really, really excited to see this come out. So I do think that there are advantages to that. One thing, Phil, that you brought up earlier is having reviews from different sources on the page. That is something that I look at. They have given some form of the game in a demo copy to a lot of reviewers or a good selection of reviewers, and they usually have those listed at the, bottom portion of the page as well.
Well, I would augment that. Like I said, it depends on the status of the company that's trying to produce the game. If you're a bigger company, Slugfest, a greater than Arcane Wonders, I'd expect to see 5 or 6 different people talking about that game from a big reviewer standpoint. If, however, you're a new game company, I'd like to just see something about the game, right? Just those reviews from, like I said, people at cons. Just get people to talk to you about your game on camera and put it on the Kickstarter so that it's not just your marketing copy that is trying to get me to be interested in the game, but somebody actually talking to the game developer, because then you're also seeing something that is close to marketable if you had demos or prototypes at a convention.
I usually want to see at least one reviewer, and I think I agree. The bigger the company, the more that I want to see different people talking about it. Also, coming from that, I tend to trust sources that I know align with what I'm looking for in a game. And that's something, as a novice board game collector, I didn't necessarily know who was going to really align with my tastes, who I could really go in and trust and say, if they like this game, I'm probably going to like this game as well. And that's something that you just develop over time. I've gotten to the point now that if I see a certain reviewer, and it's not to exclude projects that don't have that reviewer up, but if I see this reviewer giving it a glowing review and saying, this is a game that you need to back, chances are that I'm going to look at that and say, yeah, I'm going to get in on that. I think finding those different sources that kind of align with what your gaming style is and how you play and what they kind of consider a good, solid game, I tend to think that that's something that I look at as well.
Now, I will say, as again, counterpoint to that, I am a bit of one of the chaotic game people. I watch reviewers, but I don't often base my Kickstarter choices off those reviewers. There are things I look for because I tend to seek out, I don't want to say esoteric or not mainstream because I'm not a hipster, dadgummit, but I tend to look for games that aren't what you would find, because I know you, Arwen, and my cousin and another one of my friends will always get the big games. If it's super mainstream, I know somebody's going to get it. So I don't don't need to get it as much. Now, there is some overlap there, but I don't need it as much. So I look for games that fill in weird cracks and crevices or just have a certain price point and a certain theme about them. Like if it's a $15 game and the theme is feeding birds from a bird feeder, Peep Mott's, then I'll probably pick it up. While that wasn't a Kickstarter, that was just a purchase, I'll pick it up sight unseen because it's cheap and it looks nice and it has an interesting theme about it. There are other games where I know the mechanics I enjoy. I watch the promo video, I look at the stuff surrounding the game, look at the parts that they're offering with the game, and then look at the mechanics that they're talking about. And are these mechanics something that I know I can get to the table? Is the game length something I know that is sufficient for my group? Is the price point something that I know is sufficient for me and the components that they're offering? If it's yes, then I may back games. And again, that's because I'm a little chaotic with that. I have backed numerous games without looking at any reviews about the game itself, just because I liked what was being brought to the table. I liked what they were talking about. I think I've had about a 66% success rate with that. And quite honestly, for me, I'm okay with that. I guess ultimately, when it comes to backing things on Kickstarter, it's what's your price point and what's your usual way of finding the things you want to play. But reviewers are always good to know. Even if they don't necessarily influence what you might want to get from Kickstarter, being aware of reviewers that you like and reviewers that you trust is super important.
And finally, I think this one kind of hits home to us a little bit lately. Will the game get to the table with your group? And that's something that I found myself considering more and more as I get my collection, not only from a Kickstarter perspective, but just growing my collection and purchasing games. I have to look at, do I have a group that's going to be able to play this game? Am I going to keep people's interest with this? Or is this just going to sit on the shelf and be something that I never get to the table? And Phil, do you want to talk to that at all?
I think it's important that you consider that. I know for some people, the price isn't an object. But when it is a concern, when space is a concern, where you can put your games, then it has to be an important question of, will it get played? And over a number of years now, probably 10, it's taken me some time to really come to that conclusion with Kickstarters or going to a convention and being like, ooh, I like demoing this game, let's buy it. I can't. As much as I would like to play that particular game, I fully understand that it just won't see table. I might like the Temple of Elemental Evil, Dungeons and Dragons, big dungeon crawler, but that's a 40-hour campaign commitment and it's just never going to happen. Not for my group, or not for portions of my group. We have Gloomhaven. That's taking enough time. Hardcore competitive games just aren't likely to happen, like Munchkin and whatnot. Nobody wants to play them in our group. So I have to demo a game and then ask myself the question whether or not just do I want the game, but would I play the game? Because I've got limited space and I have limited funds. That goes back to our conversation on Freedom 5. The answer was no. It might get played once, and that would be the extent of it. It would never see the playtime that Sentinels of the Multiverse itself actually gets. So I agree. The ultimate question, regardless of what you look at for Kickstarter, the ultimate question is, will I play it?
It ultimately has to be a concern for just about everybody. Like you said, if funds aren't an issue and somebody's got unlimited storage space, then have at it. I don't think that many of us are in that category. We have some sort of limitation. So that's really something that just kind of keep in the back of your mind and just ask yourself, is this coming out to the table? I think that is going to wrap up our discussion on our Kickstarter tips. If you guys enjoy this content, please make sure to check out our Board Game Geek podcast page. It was just recently approved. Go on to Board Game Geek and under podcast, search for Cardboard Time, and you'll find all our stuff. You can post comments, and there's a little forum section as well. You can get all of our episodes there. We are up on Spotify. We are on Google Podcasts and a bunch of others. If you ever ever want a definitive source of where we are, go to anchor.fm/cardboardtime, and you can always get the latest episode there up to date. Also, check out our Instagram, where I post different games that we're getting to the table, things I've received in the mail for backing, and other board game related content, and also our Facebook page as well. So, Phil, it was good to have you here.
Thanks for having me around. Oh, I'm sure you'll get my rants again later. Absolutely.
That's excellent. I enjoyed having you, and hopefully we get you on as a regular part of the show. So that is it for this episode of Cardboard Time. Look for us in another 2 weeks.